How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk, guys. We're going to talk about accountability, or in some sense, discovering when there is a lack of accountability. I'm going to have Russ Hamilton on the show. We're going to give you a brief definition of accountability. There's a definition that's reactive, and there's a definition that's proactive. We're going to quickly go over both, and then we're going to discuss signs to recognize when we are losing levels of accountability, whether it's in ourselves, in individual members of the team, or the team itself. There's a lot here to discuss, but we're hoping to kind of just breeze through these points, just enough to give you guys enough information that you could take moving forward. But before we start, let me go over my sponsors. We have American Military University. If you guys are looking to get a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. They are very supportive of what we do in corrections and also very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. So if you guys get a chance, please check out American Military University if you're looking to get that degree and then bring some experience back into the classroom. We also have my book, Inmate Manipulation Decoded, that's now available on the market. The link to that is in the description. That book is starting to take off. So thank you guys for believing in me and supporting what we do. Again, the link to that is in the description. And this book is finally starting to get some notice. Lessons learned while working in a prison, my journey from officer to administration. People are reading it. They're giving me back some really good responses. Again, it's slow moving, but it is starting to gain some traction. I'm glad because that book has so much insight, and not just for myself, from other people that walk the walk. So it's good to see that people are starting to invest themselves into that book. And I've also given it to some people that are up there in training, or also the director of some state agencies who are starting to see the value behind that book as well. So again, thank you guys for supporting that who have bought the book. We also have this poster, great poster. You're overly involved with an inmate. That's doing well. If you're looking to invest in that poster, hang it up at your facility. That's 18 signs you're too close to an inmate. You can email nassahs22@gmail.com. I'll put the email on the screen now because it's also the same for our webinars. We actually have started doing on-demand webinars, if you will. We have one coming up this week that I'm going to send out the link for. It is going to be for the first of 5 webinars on leadership. If you're interested in getting information on these webinars, they're about $75 for each webinar that we produce. We have that one coming up, and then we have another one about navigating with rookie staff. And then later on, we're going to do the other 4 levels of leadership. But again, if you're interested in finding out more about our Tier Talk webinars, that's the email right there, nassahs22@gmail.com. I would reach out to them as soon as possible because the leadership one is going out soon. I think it goes out this week. So we can give you a link to that. And I think it's $75 a person. And then we could give you the link that will schedule the time and date that works best for you. And then after you watch it, the link then becomes invalid. So you want to have your notebooks and stuff ready. And if you have any questions in the process, you can always email me directly, and I'll see if I can answer any of your concerns. All right, let me get Russ. What's up, Russ?
Good morning, Anthony. How's it going?
Good. Hey, Russ, you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Of course. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I've also spent time as a senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a company that provides rehabilitation and reentry services for a local probation department and a local county jail where I am a case manager.
Right. And Russ, how's Keepers of Chaos going on Facebook?
Yeah, we're still trying to get beyond that, that 6,000 mark. I'm hoping that as springtime comes and we're able to do some more things that, maybe in a few months we can just surpass that altogether and be talking about, moving beyond that 10,000 mark. But we'll have to see. We need more good correctional staff, personnel, officers, sergeants, lieutenants, etc. to join, though. So Keepers of Chaos with a K on Facebook.
Yes, and I remember those days trying to get past the 10,000. Now I just hit over the 23,000 mark a couple of days ago. So now I'm pushing, like my next goal, my next milestone I'm looking for is 25,000. I'm going to try to, it used to be every 1,000. But then as you get a little bigger, you try to do a little more. So my next goal will be 25,000, but I did just break the 23,000 mark. So that's pretty cool. Hey, Russ, before we break into the dialogue real quick, and make sure we're heading in the right direction, if I can just get your opinion on something. Do you think lack of accountability can threaten the safety and security of a jail or prison operation?
Yeah, that's kind of one of those things that is kind of in that whole package about complacency and so forth. If we're not holding ourselves accountable, if we're not holding our peers accountable, if we're not holding administration accountable, if we're not holding those we supervise accountable, then where is the motivation to actually go out there and do good correctional work? Good correctional work happens at an intentional level. And if we're not at that intentional level, we won't be seeing the fruits of our efforts because we've put no effort in. And when that happens, it's just a disaster waiting to, come back and bite us in the ass.
Yeah, now, guys, I am reading a book now called The Oz Principle. If you guys get a chance, it is a very interesting book. It discusses... It is about accountability, and it discusses, the dangers of lack of accountability, but it discusses it from a business perspective. The key about what I try to do is try to read these books and apply it to the prison setting. And today what we're going to talk about are things to look for when you start to see that the accountability is starting to lack. And yes, as Russ said, I do agree that if you have lack of accountability, one thing is you're not solving any of the problems. You're spending more time pointing the fingers at each other. And then you also tend not to move forward in an honest direction, because if you lack accountability, then the problem is you're not really addressing the concerns at the root of the cause, which sometimes could be you. So again, this accountability falls on every level throughout all departments. So remember that. It falls on every level through all departments. Now, there's a definition that makes people afraid of the word accountability, and it's a definition that's more reactive. Let me read this definition first. This definition simply states, from Webster, the obligation or willingness to accept responsibility for one's actions. Now, if you look at that definition, it seems to be very negative in tone. It's like I've done something wrong. Now I got to step up and take accountability. And it seems very reactive. The concept of the book that I'm reading now, Oz, changes that definition to something more positive, in which it's now something that we seek in our effort to be proactive. And this is their definition, and I love it. I love this definition. I want to read it out to you guys real quick. Accountability, a personal choice to rise above one's circumstances and demonstrate the ownership necessary for achieving desired results. To see it, own it, solve it, and do it. Russ, what's your thoughts on the difference between those definitions?
The first one is just kind of a passive kind of like catch-all. When you first showed me this just a few minutes ago, just so people know like how off the cuff we are doing this, when you come back to the whole, what is it? Is it see it, own it?
Yeah. So we're going to, So what Russ is going to get at soon is where we're going to talk about the line of accountability. And if you look at the above, you want to always stay at this top line where it says see it, own it, solve it, do it. When you start to fall below the line, which is what we'll discuss, are going to be these 6 areas here. But you're right, Russ. It's see it, own it, solve it, do it. That's the lines of accountability. First you see it, then you own it, then you solve the problem, and then you go ahead or you put the problem together to solve it, and then you go ahead and implement whatever procedures or practices are needed to solve that problem.
And you see, that particular model is very similar, and comes back to something that all of us in this profession should be familiar with when we're talking about things happening at the tactical level, which is the OODA loop. You orient, or you observe, you orient, you decide, and then you act. And so if we're doing those things, if we're, taking ownership of the situations, whatever they are, the incidents, what have you, then we're able to actually, impact those things. But we want to do it from that proactive angle where we don't actually wait for things to happen. We want to see them on the horizon and deal with them before they become an actual problem.
I like how you equated that to the OODA loop, because you're right. So what is it? Observe, right? Which is see it.
Yep.
I know it's orient, but you got to own it. You got to make the problem
Right.
your own. Then you make the effort to think through and solve it, and then you finally commit to the actions that solve the matter. Yeah, that was awesome, Russ. That was pretty awesome. I wonder if there was an exchange of ideas, or they're just building off each other. But that was very similar.
Yeah, sometimes even a knuckle dragger, can come up with something.
Yeah, I didn't want to say anything, but your knuckles are bleeding. So guys, so here's what it is. Is basically we want to keep ourselves above that line. All right. So what we're going to talk about are the 6 things that you need to notice that start to let you know that you are starting to fall below that line of accountability. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over those 6 things, quickly give a scenario or two in which we could, on how that could apply to specifically what we're doing. Again, we'll give the thought, we'll give out a few scenarios, but ultimately we present the thought, and then you got to figure out how it apply into your own world. So, and again, guys, this applies to us. So let's look at ourselves. Let's look to see what we're doing. It applies through our supervisors, our frontline workers, but ultimately at the highest of levels, us as a team. And to be honest with you, accountability, it does start from the top down, because if you have leadership that's not accountable, then you're going to get the same actions from those below you. But it does start within, but it also relates to a culture. If you have a culture that's defined by your leaders where there is no accountability, then having said that, you can't expect your knowledge workers or your front line to go ahead and seek accountability when their own leadership doesn't. So, okay. So the first thing that you want to look for, and I'm sure we are familiar with this, is ignoring or denying a problem exists. So Russ, we'll have you go. I'll have Russ go first, and then I'm going to kind of compliment Russ's thoughts, because this is Russ was not aware of the dialogue we're having today. So I want to build off on Russ's ignorance. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see.
So one of the famous things is that we just talk about. Hey, some of the things we do or don't do are caused by that river in Egypt, denial, as it were, where we just decide that, hey, we're going to go ahead and pretend like everything is A-okay. No one's going to bother to, call attention to the elephant in the room, as it were. And you know what? It kind of harkens back to one of those old videos I did where I said, well, we've been doing it that way, and no one bothers to see the potential for the catastrophe that lies ahead. And, there's a lot of different things that I could point to on that. Everything from, not doing searches correctly, to not patting down inmates, to just kind of letting things slide and just going, hey, you know what? We haven't had an incident in a while. We must be doing everything right and A-okay. And so it's kind of like, those people on the Titanic who were, supposedly, rearranging deck chairs, or the symphony that's playing as the boat's going down. It's not good. We need to be focused on, seeing that problem, and going forward from there into being in a position where we can solve it. Because solving it and then acting on what our solution is the only thing that's going to get us to the other side. Otherwise, I mean, what's the biggest potential we always face in corrections is a line of duty death.
Yeah, and guys, I want to mention something too. So ignore and deny and wait and see, and we'll get to that too, are two different things. Ignore and deny is knowing that there's a problem and then denying its existence. Wait and see is let's just see what happens, and that's two different concerns. The ignore and deny is more of, like Russ said, we're not doing pat frisk. Now, if I'm a supervisor and I'm watching these inmates move, and I'm seeing that the officers are just kind of complacent in their ways and not pat frisking them properly or whatever it is, I know that there's an issue behind that, 100%. But me as a supervisor, let's say I'm complacent, I decide, I'll just let it go because nothing happened yesterday. I'm sure nothing's going to happen today. But again, the more you ignore and deny, the more it starts to build up, But so in this case here, the reason why, for me, this could be one of the most dangerous spots of lack of accountability is because now you have people that know the problem exists and they're choosing not to do anything about it. So again, Russ, even people that aren't doing their searches, we know maybe sometimes you could have that person that, is saying that they're doing the searches, but they're not. And it's like, okay, well, I know Russ ain't doing his searches, but you know what? Maybe he doesn't have time to do it today. And then Russ doesn't do it yesterday or the next day. And it's like, well, I know Russ, probably didn't have time to do that. You wind up starting to justify. This is the scary part now. You start to justify the actions of the person not doing their job. And now that is what starts to become the norm. I mean, Russ, we've talked about things where it was bad practices that stray so far away from policy, but has become the norm. And we know they're bad practices, but because we've done it for so long and we've ignored the potential of the concern it's going to lead to, we've learned to justify that. Oh, it's more convenient to do it that way. So my biggest concern when it comes to ignore and deny is the fact that the problem exists. You choose to ignore it or deny to some level that it is a problem. But again, that still falls into the level of you ignoring it. But when you start to deny it, you're denying it based on the fact that you've learned to justify the issue at hand or the concern at hand and look how you justify. The justification's usually weak. Like, oh, it's more convenient to do it that way. Or another point of lack of accountability was Russ was too busy today, or he's too busy, or that position itself doesn't allow for those time to do searches. So again, guys, remember when it comes to ignoring or denying, that the problem exists. But when it comes to wait and see, it could be a problem. I don't know. Let's wait until it becomes one. But Russ, would you agree with that, Russ? The point where you ignore a problem or you deny a problem to the point where you start justifying that, it is a problem, but there's really nothing more you can do about it. And at this point, we could still operate effectively this way.
Yeah, it's because, there's kind of a scale that we end up kind of sliding down. We have this procedural or policy deviance, right? And, that's probably, completely legitimate. Sometimes we're going to run into that. But when we slip from that policy or procedural deviance to being the policy or procedural norm, then all of a sudden, we've actually, gone from recognizing it to, and maybe that's a wait and see thing. I'm not exactly sure, but we've gone from that to being able to now actively ignore it, even though we knew about it in the past. And then it just becomes accepted for a way that we're going to act as far into the future as it takes us for us to completely run off the rails.
Yeah, I think that kind of, because there's a little bit of a blurred line here. I think what you mentioned, it hits the point. It's more of just knowing that the problem exists and then going ahead and just letting it, letting it play out. Like, again, oh, don't worry, the problem will eventually work itself out. Wait, in corrections, you don't have an option to even think that. The moment you notice a problem, at least make sure that you're addressing it to some level so you can actually say, we're handling it and together we're going to work this out, as opposed to expecting the problem to go ahead and handle itself. So I think the thing here with ignoring and denying is knowing that there's a problem that exists and just kind of finding ways to justify the existence of that problem, or just it will figure itself out eventually. So let's just go right to that next one then, because we're kind of blurred into it, but the wait and see. So again, just to explain this would be more of, the gut feeling that you have, but you don't really know if there's a problem. It's more of maybe there could be, I don't know, but let's just wait until it becomes one, and then we'll go ahead and act. Kind of like, that snowball effect. We're going to let it roll downhill, and all of a sudden it's this big mess. And then when you go back, you realize, yeah, I noticed this 6 months ago, but I didn't think it was going to be that big of a problem until now. Russ, what's your thoughts on the wait and see? I know you dealt with that, correct?
Yeah, that's just a matter of, kind of like, you know what, maybe I won't have to deal with this. So if I just decide to, hey, if it develops, it develops. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And you know what? Maybe I'll luck out, or maybe we'll put in the lift principle here, leave it for third watch, as we used to call it, and just decide that, hey, it's not worth our investigatory efforts or whatever. But the problem is that at that point you're much further behind the problem than you are in front of it, and the solutions oftentimes have to be much more extreme. There's a lot of things that I could point out in the way that could go. We could go from having to put the yard down and try and control something that's going on, to instead having to use lethal force. So don't wait and see. Get in front of it as soon as you can. Sometimes we do have to just up our observations and kind of try and look into what the problem actually is, but that's not the same thing as wait and see. That's more of a try and detect and understand kind of situation. So you know what, never put off getting into the hard stuff just because you're hoping that it will go away and the next watch will solve it, or the next day's watch will solve it.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Russ. I think this is more for me when you look at the effort over the outcome. There are some times where you see a situation and it's like, okay, well, we still reached this point, so we're good. We're good. We're good. We're hitting our numbers. We're good. We're hitting our numbers. We're good. But all of a sudden, when people start to look at how those numbers are being hit, it's like, okay, well, maybe there was a problem we didn't realize. And eventually, in the long term, we start losing out on the effectiveness of those outcomes. Now, just to give you an example, you can have an employee that does the work but is disgruntled, but he does the work, or she does the work. And at first, it's not an issue because they're doing the work. So it's like, you know what? I don't want conflict as a supervisor. Are they still doing the work? Yes. Okay, then you know what it is. I don't care if they're disgruntled. They're still doing the work. It is what it is. But then eventually later on down the line, negativity spreads. They start pulling back on their efforts. The team starts seeing that, and they start pulling back on their efforts because they want people held accountable. And instead of us going back in time and addressing it when it should have been addressed, where, yeah, you got someone doing the job, but their attitude towards the job is what really matters. But you avoided that because you were afraid of conflict. And now 6 months down the line, it's spread. It spread like cancer and spread like wildfire. So again, I think it's also making sure you're aware of the efforts that go behind the outcome to make sure that we're producing things in an effort that's long-term and not something later on you found the line that you've been cutting corners. And at this point, the outcome really isn't as effective as it should have been, but it could have been a problem you could have noticed prior before it snowball affected. Would you agree with that, Russ? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's part and parcel. That this whole thing is just you have to look at it from a deeper, bigger perspective in order to understand where you're failing.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, that perspective, like Russ just said, comes from making the effort to not just look at outcomes, but look at the effort behind it. I mean, that to me matters because effort is where the belief is. Effort is where the belief of the work is, because anybody could produce an outcome to some extent. But I want people that are dedicated to the effort because that's where the trust comes in too. In case the outcome doesn't exist, I trust the person believes in the work and is committed to the effort. This is a good one. And again, we have three more after this, and then we'll be completed. This is a good dialogue, guys. Trust me, because if you notice it, you gotta address it, and this gives us a chance to notice some signs. It's not my job. I can go first on this, Russ, if you don't mind, real quick, Russ, and then I'll pass it over to you. Go ahead. This will be quick. On the administrative level, at the highest level, we're involved with the different departments working together to create the bigger picture, the result, the end result of what's needed. So as a higher level manager, it's not so much of the people's ability to do their job, but rather their ability to contribute to the bigger picture. What happens to me sometimes is I may see that most things in corrections usually involves more than one department. And when you're in administration, you have to see whatever the concern is. And the first question you should ask is, what departments are involved in this? What's the priority here? So what department do we need to serve as an end result? And then focus our energies towards helping that department. The last thing I want is a mentality of it's not my job, because the problem is when you start seeing things in that bigger picture, a lot of the responsibilities may start to blur or connect. So the problem is when they start to blur or connect, the people that have that mentality that it's not my job, they don't step in. So the problem is if you're at the higher level and you're looking to try to start putting together that bigger picture, you need people that are willing to step up during those moments of blending or ambiguity, because that's going to happen, guys, in corrections. When you're overseeing a house, a lot of the functions tend to blend or blur at the higher level, at the level of contribution that I'm talking about. So if you don't have people stepping up saying, it's not, it may not be my job, but I'm going to go ahead and do what I can to connect the pictures until I then can step away because someone else is now taking responsibility for it. So again, there's the effort to step in and the effort to step away. When you have done your part, you're not going to find that with people that constantly play, it's not my job, it's not my job. To me, that's a very big concern when operating corrections at a highest level. But I would also ask Russ, I'm sure you could see that on a departmental level as well, when you have people that just quickly diffuse responsibility, especially when it comes to the areas where they could blend, saying that's not my job. So therefore you have nobody stepping in to take over that responsibility where it tends to blur. Because I'm sure you've seen that, right, Russ?
No, absolutely. The thing here to me that I always harken back to, those, job is a really, really narrow definition. And so I was never concerned so much about whether or not it's my job, but I really like to look at it as whether it's my duty, because duty encompasses a lot more things than just some narrow idea of what a job is. A job is, just, X plus Y plus Z. And, that's the totality of it. When we do the thing that we do in corrections is that, we have, three basic things that we have to do. And that's provide for the safety of the public, provide for the safety of staff, and provide for the safety of inmates. And that is all encompassing. There's nothing that you get to ignore. There might be departments or people who are, actually supposed to take more, attention towards what you're seeing and looking at in that, but you don't get to just say, oh, it's their job, it's somebody else's. You have an incumbent duty to respond to things that might impact that safety and security of the public, safety and security of staff, and the safety and security of the offenders.
Yeah, I love this, Russ, because I have a scenario real quick where it was a medical situation that while we're waiting for medical to respond, custody does assume the role as best they could until medical can go ahead and step in. And the last thing you want at that moment while you're waiting for medical is for someone from custody, let's say a first responder, to go ahead and say, that's not my job, and literally wait for medical when, there could be something that's being tied up. Now, granted, when you say it's not my job, I know that maybe on departmental level, you think that you're going to be safe. Maybe, I doubt it, but you may think that way on an individualized effort. But management, we don't have the luxury of siloing the jobs. We need that to connect. We don't have the luxury of, saying, well, that was just custody and medical needed. No, because we need shit to be fluid, because we're responsible for everything that comes together. So I think that our job, in order to show some level of higher accountability here, is to always showcase the bigger picture to all the employees at every level, because if they see the bigger picture, they understand where there's the need for fluidity. Because the one thing that stops fluidity is that phrase right there. It's not my job. It's not my job. That kills fluidity, that kills momentum. And that to me is a big liability when it comes to the running of safety and security, because when someone says it's not my job, everything fucking freezes. It freezes. And the last thing you want when you're doing an after incident review is you don't want to see reports where people literally were just held themselves to that defined job. When Russ said you have that higher level of duty, I love that. I'm going to use that like you wouldn't believe. I'm going to borrow that everywhere I go now, because you're right. If someone comes up and says that's not my job, then I'll go back and say, well, then what's your duty then? Because you're 100% correct. Duty is the higher level of accountability, which I think will help us empower that fluidity that we need at all levels, but definitely something that's seen from the higher level down. That was powerful, Russ. I thought that was, I learned something. I love that. I love what you said. I'm gonna remember that. I'm gonna remember that. I'm gonna use that a lot. You know, I'll give you credit, of course. I always have, but wish I could have put that in one of my books.
You always do, Anthony.
I said that's a Russ's thought. But man, Russ, that's noteworthy. You should take that quote later on and post that somewhere just to have it so you can say it's yours, because you never know. Someone like myself will steal it, because I'll forget who gave it to me at one point. You know, so claim it now. Go on
video now, Anthony.
Yeah, it's on video. Go on Keepers of Chaos right now. Put that quote, and I love that. It may not be your job, but it's your fucking duty. This is a good one, Russ. And again, we're down to the last three of signs to notice when you're starting to see some lack of accountability. And by the way, catch these in yourself as well, because we're not perfect. These could be our default measures as well, because we do connect, for the most part, accountability to some negative reactionary mode. Let me do this one. This is the next one. Confusion. Tell me what to do. Now, this is unique, Russ, because I've seen this happen too. So let's say a concern happens, and we'll draw some maybe a scenario or two, but the person will take some level of take some lack of accountability by saying they didn't know what was happening because they've never been trained on that. And at this point here, instead of stepping up and trying to get the knowledge they need to solidify whatever direction they're trying to go, they go from confusion to, well, tell me what to do, Sarge. Or tell me what to do, Lieutenant. So here it is. I haven't been trained in that area. I don't know. Okay, well, you know, we would go back to supervisors and say, okay, well, I'll give you some retraining or whatever it is. But most of the time, that's not really what the issue is. This person chose not to jump up and take initiative. And then when shit hits the fan, the first thing they say is, well, I haven't been trained in that area, and nobody told me what to do at this moment in time or for this concern. Russ, I know you have dealt with that. Am I correct? It goes from confusion, I haven't been trained, to, well, no one told me what to do.
Yeah, you know, people, they always want to default to that whole idea about, you know, well, it's not a defined role. It's not my job. I don't want to take initiative. You know, I just want to be told what to do, because when I'm told what to do, then I will be able to take the least number of actions because I'm lazy. Right.
Wait,
and
Russ,
so,
Russ, can you also add that other thing? When you're also told what to do, where does the accountability go?
The accountability goes, you know, back up the chain, because then you just get to say, well, you know what, Sergeant Hamilton never specified that that's what I was supposed to do. I thought I was just supposed to, you know, show up and wait for further direction or whatever it is. You know, I had that. I think it was like my very first. I think it was, you know, one of my very first actions as a sergeant. You know, I had some, you know, numbskull from the Union trying to just, you know, slough off, not having to put back together the package for the riot helmets that we were using, because that wasn't his job. And, you know, and they're just trying to, you know, buffalo their way through doing the least amount possible. So anyway, that's just where it always rests with. Not taking the initiative means that you don't have to be responsible for the outcome that occurs, whereas, you know, the outcome that occurs is likely to be far worse because no initiative at all was taken.
Yeah, and guys, let me just mention something too again. Remember these two things, because they connect: confusion and tell me what to do. Usually the people that will, let's say a concern happens, instead of taking ownership or accountability, they quickly go to, I haven't been trained in that area or something. And then the next thing they do is they wait for someone else to tell them what to do, which again is really lack of accountability, because the confusion part, they didn't know who's to blame. And then again, well, I'll commit to an action, but Russ, what do you want me to do? And now if something goes wrong, Russ is now responsible. And this person can kind of say, well, hey, you know, I didn't know what to do, and then the Sarge told me what to do. And you're right. In corrections, you need people that are initiative takers. But I also want to say one thing, to be fair to the front line, you need higher level management who appreciates initiative takers and are not quick to be punitive. In order to have initiative takers, you need an environment that builds some level of trust. You can't have it both ways. So you can't say, well, I want initiative takers and then write them up every time they make a mistake. Now that goes back on you, management. That's your fault. You need initiative takers, and then we can be constructive with them in an effort to keep them wanting to take that initiative. All right, now, and you agree with that, Russ, right? Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, for certain. That's the way we have to look at it. We don't want to shut down the initiative. We want people to take on more and more roles, more and more responsibility. We want them to be more and better trained at each and every possible juncture that we can hit with them, because we want the entirety of our staff to be able to handle whatever comes along. And today it's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, generational gaps. I agree with that. 100%. We got to do a show on that one day. I like this Saturday morning stuff. We'll see if we can make this a routine. Two more. So we have cover your tail. All right, Russ, this is, I'm sure, something that you hate. I hate as well, because to me, covering your tail is more about you. It's a selfish attempt where when you feel automatically that every thing you do has to put you in survival mode. When again, if you have good leadership, because good leadership would never foster this type of atmosphere. They don't. Bad leadership does. I will tell you that. Bad leadership will foster CYA, which is what we discussed before just seconds ago. But Russ, what's your thoughts on the cover your tail as a lack of accountability?
So there's one aspect of this that you can look at from the perspective of covering your tail by doing, or more specifically, not doing certain things. Like we talked about, the initiative immediately before that, not taking initiative so that I can't be held accountable, or at least I can only be held accountable for not taking the initiative, but I have my fallback. I wasn't trained. I didn't understand the orders or whatever it was. Covering your tail can have a negative connotation in that respect. It can also have a positive connotation depending on the way that you employ or deploy this idea. And by that, what I mean is this: if you're, trying to avoid actions or take actions that are only meant to cover up what you did, like a lie or leaving the area, and I've seen all these things done before, then you're in the wrong. If you are taking accountability for your actions, though, that is a different type of covering your ass, so to speak, in that you're using policy, procedure, and established good correctional practices in order to make sure that you provide for not necessarily the best optimal outcome, but providing for an outcome that complies with policy, procedure, state law, and case law.
Yeah, you know what, Russ, you're right. So there is a level of covering your tail that's needed in this profession, again, because not all matters are going to stay in-house. So even if you have a good leadership that promotes trust and makes things constructive in our efforts to be innovative, the problem is that it's always going to go to another perspective that's outside of what we do, who don't understand. And of course, documentation and stuff like that does matter in our efforts to prove that we've exhausted all the right measures, or to some level justify our actions in case they're misunderstood. But there are some people that get so used to the cover your tail method that I think what happens here is, even if they are told to do something, they're constantly preparing for it to fail. And at that point, their documentation or their emails are just in the bias of, this isn't going to work, so I'm going to go this way that Russ told me. But in the process, let me just, email myself, document my efforts, while instead of going in as a team. Let me just give you an example, because this is tough, because in our profession, we do have a higher level of liability. So Russ was spot on, where by making the difference, knowing that, yeah, you do need to do it at a certain point, and I get it, but not at a point where I think it becomes your fail-safe each and every time, because you're more paranoid than you are about actually really documenting it for whatever that higher level concern is. I know some supervisors right now that when they're given instruction and they have to pass that instruction off, they've gotten so used to the fact of they want everything in writing. And I get it. Sometimes it may be needed, but sometimes we still have to try to lean away from that when we can to build some trust, So again, I'm not saying that it shouldn't always happen, but if I worked with Russ, this is tough. This is a tough one. If I worked with Russ and we had a working relationship, this is really tough because the problem is that you really don't know how people are under pressure. That's a concern. I mean, this is really a concern. You don't know how people are under pressure when the consequences are so severe for making a mistake. And in corrections, you're going to have a lot of it. So you're going to have people that may be used to the fact that they have to cover their tail each and time they commit to something, especially if the order comes from above. But the problem is it doesn't foster a culture of trust either. So I think there's got to be a fine balance in, going ahead and committing to something, or going ahead and committing to something, but making sure that you cross all your T's and dot your I's, and you're documenting everything and you're emailing everything out. I mean, sometimes it's like, you know what? Let's just take the effort and go. Yeah, before I go, I'm going to go ahead and email Russ because, okay, I get it. But, at the end of the day, you've worked with Russ before. Do you have any reason to mistrust Russ? No. Okay, well, if Sergeant Russ gave you an order, now you're going back and emailing Russ, hey, as discussed, the order that you provide me, blah, 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 I'll be doing it later today. Boom, sent. It's like, okay, well, now if I was Russ and we've never had an issue, I may have a concern with that. It's like, hey, I know why you're doing it, and I get it. And of course, I in certain circumstances, I would do the same thing. But this really require it, because my biggest concern is the small things that you start emailing everything over. Like I've dealt with people, Russ, that, you give them an order, you're walking with them and blah, 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 and we're doing it around. And I'll be like, hey, such and such, do me a favor. Can you make sure such this, and this get done? Sure, not a problem. Okay, good. And then you go back to your office 10 minutes later and there's an email documenting everything that you've asked for and requested. And it's like, I get why the person needs to do it, but I can't help also feeling a certain way about it, because it's like, I get why you're doing it, but have I ever been in a position where, you felt that you couldn't trust my word? I guess it's weird, Russ, because there is that balance, Russ. I mean, there's that balance where, I get why you want to, let me ask you a question, Russ, because this is good. We could do a whole topic on this. Remember, guys, we don't prepare our dialogue beforehand. So this is why it becomes spot on. Russ, I got to ask you a question though. Is there ever a point where covering your tail is too much and then it becomes divisive?
So I would look at it from this perspective: is some people, put that type of information out there in order to cover their tail. There are others, though, that they're doing it for maybe covering their tail and in order to send a message. And what that message is exactly is open to interpretation. It might be the fact that, hey, you know what? You can always count on me to make sure that I rat you out. Not that ratting is a bad thing, but what I'm trying to get to here is, it's not so much about can I trust the orders you give me, but can you trust me, to not make sure that someone else knows that you're going to be my fall guy if you give me the wrong type of order. So there's a push and pull dynamic there, where some people, they try and take over the power dynamic, even though they're on the bottom of it, by making sure that people know that, hey, I'm not here to back your play. I'm here to make sure that you're held accountable rather than me in any given scenario.
Right. So Russ, so let me ask real quick. I want because this is good, and we got to do a topic on this, and then we'll go right to the last thought. I promise you. I love what you just said. I don't want to leave it out in the open. You said power dynamics, so I agree with that. And the reason why I agree with that is I think that there are some people that may use it for the right reasons. Let me document it because I do have a concern with it, whatever it is. But then there are people that just going to document everything because they don't want to be the person responsible for that decision, even if it's a good decision. So there are certain people that are going to document everything. And again, it is what it is. But I think some of them people really document it because they don't want to be seen as being behind that decision, even if it's a good decision. Like, I mean, that's my biggest concern. My biggest concern is, are there people that do it because it's an effort to push away their level of responsibility towards any action. I mean, Russ, if you were a sergeant, right, and every order you gave was always followed up by an email from one of your officers, just always documenting everything that you said, wouldn't that be like, man, where's the trust here?
I think that there is a trust issue there, but I also think that type of mannerism or behavior is also a manipulation tactic. Don't come to me first, come to me last, because you know that I'm keeping book on you, and because I'm keeping book on you, you may want to bother someone else first.
Ooh,
So
that's good.
It's deep, but the thing is I've run into that, so it's one of those things. It can be there can be a surface level of intention to it that's out there, but there can be things deeper in that current that you're not aware of, and so sometimes you have to think all of the permutations and possibilities through.
Yeah, I think me and Russ are going to explore this in a later topic where covering your ass could be it's a balanced attempt, because we've always told people to cover your ass. We did. But maybe after reading this and just having our discussion right now, maybe there are some boundaries to the point where, are you covering your ass because it's needed, or are you covering your ass because you're afraid to make a decision? And now you're just throwing everybody under the bus. So I would like to explore that later. But one thing we did not say just now is that, we did not say never to cover your ass. I want people to know that. Of course, you have to cover your ass, but I think there are some cases where you have to ask yourself why you're covering your ass. That would make sense, right? Why are you doing it right now? And the last one, Russ, and this more simple one, the finger pointing. So you want to go with that one first? Russ? There it is. Everything but you. Hey, so Russ,
yeah.
How does that happen?
I've seen people, actually get prepared to do this. They put themselves in that position where, if something goes wrong, I just want you to know, and, point across the way, it's my supervisor, it's my supervisor's supervisor, it's, it's my fellow officer, whatever it is. And so rather than taking the credit and or the blame, they want to shift both. I don't want the credit, I don't want the blame, I want someone else to have it, I want someone else to be saddled with the responsibility, because I'm just not comfortable with taking my own initiative, or making the play, or being responsible for something that really has the potential for going wrong. And so and they're always prepared. But this is one thing that you also see in the inmate population a lot, is when we talk about justification. Inmates always have a justification, ready, willing, and ready to go, so that anything that happens, they can shift the blame. It was my probation officer's fault. It was the probation department's fault. And I know these aren't necessarily inmate things, but I'm saying it from the perspective that I tend to work in a lot now. And they always have some way. It's society's fault. It's the system's fault. The system isn't perfect. So I got caught up in the system, and it turned me out. And it's never about their own choices. It's never about their own initiative or lack of initiative. It's always about someone else's issues.
Yeah, Russ, you know what? As I'm thinking about this, and I just got to feed off, and this is our last, that was our last bullet. I got to feed off something that Russ, you kind of leaned into, which I think is great. And we definitely got to have another dialogue on the CYA, because check this out. So even the finger pointing, if I look at CYA, let's say all of us got together as a team to make a decision that really involved a very collective perspective. You got a concern that involves all these departments. So we're all at the table and we're trying to figure out a solution that works best for everyone to move forward. And let's say the center of it all would be the outcome of what we're going to prepare to do with an inmate. And let's say it involves multiple things: custody, medical, mental health. I mean, the usual departments that are involved in this. And we come up with a decision that we all agree with. Okay, so we all agree with this decision. We made it collectively. And then maybe there's this one person that has a level of doubt over that decision. They don't express it. Maybe they expressed their concerns, but the decision didn't go their way. And then what happens is when we have this gathering in which we're all trying to move forward with an idea, they don't get what they want. And then they take this decision as a win-loss. So now this person, because CYA could also be something that you're constantly doing in case something fails. So I get it, but when we're working as a team, I also see it as not making decisions along the way. So here's what I mean. Let me talk about. So let's say we make this effort to move forward, right? And then let's say the component that involves whatever department, let's say custody, I call them and I say, hey, we got to do blah, 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 which brings us to, let's say, point M, right? Whatever it is. And I'll make my point M. Wherever we got to go, we got to get to point M, right? So as I'm talking to the supervisor, instead of them making decisions on how to get to point M, what do I got to do at point A? Okay, good, Ganji, I got that. Now, what do you want me to do at point B? Now, what do you want me to do at point C? Now, what do you want me to do at point D? All the way down to M. So therefore, they don't have any onus to anything that got us to point M. And that could be an effort in their mind to cover their own ass.
And they don't own any of it then.
And right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, okay. So maybe there's some middle ground there, Russ. Maybe there's some middle ground there because this is a complicated. It's not easy because I get why people would want to do it, but there's got to be a line that says, "Hey, listen, your actions right now are really selfish. They're selfish, and you're not taking responsibility. Like if you have someone that constantly seeks to cover their own ass." All the time, right? All the time, then to be honest with you, as they start to move up, I don't really see them as good leaders. I don't. If everything they're doing is always trying to pass the buck, because I'm assuming if you have people that may constantly, for no reason, pass the buck upwards, I'm thinking, does that behavior change if they move upwards? Will they not only pass the buck upwards, but also blame their people? I mean, covering your own ass, I don't know. Is there ever a time where you're not in a position to do that? When you're in a position to say, hey, listen, I'm with the team. So we may have had some mistakes, but I can't separate myself from the decisions of what we made as a team because ultimately I am responsible and accountable for this team. So I don't know. I like what you said, Russ, before. I figured there's a point where I get that why some people may have to cover their ass. I get it. If there's a concern or something to question, but it also could be a way to get out of decisions or ownership of those decisions being made, because we're not always going to have things go the way we want it. And that doesn't mean that because you don't get something that goes the way you want it, selfishly now every move and everything that's happening is going to be a CYA thing. I mean, I've dealt with people that are so afraid to make a decision because they're so concerned about the consequences of that decision that they're going to want to be micromanaged so they can go ahead and defer that level of accountability to someone else. Now, again, management got to give an environment of trust. But if that environment is there, and if you have trust and we're constructive in those efforts, and we are working together and we have a history of working together, I think if you're constantly doing that, you burn trust. Because I'm thinking about how I would feel, Russ. How would you feel if every order you gave that expected to be fluid was constantly questioned, not in an effort to learn, but an effort to cover that person's ass. And then every time you go back, you got documented emails of every direction you've ever gave that day or whatever it is. I mean, that to me, that it's just, where's the trust? At one point, when do you take responsibility and move forward? Or are you just constantly going to be in cover your ass mode? Is there a line, Russ? Is there a line?
Yeah, that's just electronic pushback, right? It's the same thing as if this guy had actually said, hey, don't come to me with this stuff. At least he said it out front and outright. Instead he's taken the way of not having to do that by constantly pushing that send button on the electronic email, and it's kind of a thing saying, hey, you know what? You may not want any of this.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do a discussion on this maybe on your next availability today or tomorrow just to post something up because we can go all day on this. Hey, Russ, you have anything you like to say in closing when it comes to lack of accountability? Because as I said, guys, we had to bring up cover your own ass because that could be used to show lack of accountability. But again, in our profession, you know, there's got to be a balance here. It's great because I just learned something new today. I just got to figure out how we got to balance that. I'm going to take some notes today and do some reading. But Russ, you have any closing thoughts on accountability and how it could hurt the overall operations of a facility?
Yeah, I think that this kind of, all comes back to, how much you want to fill out that mantle of duty and responsibility and power that you're giving when you're working as an officer in this profession, because it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of power. It's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of duty. And what you can take away from that is how much do you want to fill out that shell, right? Do you just want to try and ignore all the facets of your power, all the facets of your responsibility, or do you want to utilize them to the maximum amount that you can go in there and really truly impact your department in a really positive way? And so some people, they will never, fulfill the major points of the power that they have and the responsibility that they've got. And then there are others that will step forward and, be the real true leaders.
Yeah, and guys, when it comes to accountability, I mean, at the end of the day, it's really in corrections. You need people to step up and face the problems. You can't avoid conflict and survive in corrections. And if you're looking to become a supervisor, the conflicts and decisions you have to make only become harder. Again, every level of responsibility actually limits your freedom. A lot of people think you get more freedom, but you don't. You get less freedom. But having said that, guys, I think there does become a time where when it comes to being accountable, that you have to realize in yourself, are you doing enough to show accountability and in an effort to move forward? I love that definition we had before. I just want to read it one more time before we close. Accountability, a personal choice to rise above one's circumstances and demonstrate the ownership necessary for achieving desired results. See it, own it, solve it, and do it. If you look at the line here, you always want to stay above the line. So the moment you start to drop and you fall back into one of these 6 categories, your team does, or even the agency itself, you have to revisit to pull yourself above that line. And again, see it, own the problem. That's the key. Owning it. Owning it is key. That's where the accountability comes in, because once you own it, you look to solve it at the most honest of levels, which includes, the chance that you too could be the problem. And then you go ahead and implement whatever practices are needed. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.